couple final questions from me, and then we'll ask some audience questions. I had the privilege, I was watching 60 Minutes, and I saw an interview with yourself and your wife, Michelle. And there were a number of questions to you, and then they asked your wife, and excuse this is a relatively personal question, it's a question about race. Mm-hmm. How did she feel about race, the dangers of the presidency, and so forth? And she looked straight in the camera and she said, I worry more about my husband walking down the street in the Senate, from the Senate, than anything else. And at that moment, I understood the gap in perception between people of races in America. Mm-hmm. And it was made vivid to me. Yeah. How different her view, my view, would be, same question. Right. Can you talk a little bit about that issue in America?
Absolutely. Look, W.E.B. Du Bois said the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And if you expand that, the problem of the 21st century is the problem of the other, people who are not like us. Whether it's in religious terms, if you go to Sri Lanka, it's what's been fueling a vicious civil war there, even though everybody looks exactly the same. Same in Northern Ireland. Or it manifests itself in this country in racial terms. And that it has always been a nagging problem. There have been reports just this week that African Americans feel more pessimistic than they have in a very long time. And there's statistics that bear out how they in fact have not kept pace when it comes to economic growth in this country. The virulent anti-immigrant sentiment that we're seeing all across the country is something that has been striking. I mean, just in the last 2 years, you've seen a shift where, I fought for comprehensive immigration reform 2 years ago, and we didn't succeed, but there wasn't this raw anger about it that you see now, even when I'm campaigning among Democrats sometimes. So part of what I believe I bring to this office is somebody who sees the world through a variety of different races. My mother was white. My father was African. I grew up in Hawaii. I've got a sister who's half Indonesian. She's married to a Chinese Canadian. I've said...
Sounds like Google.
Yeah. It's... family'd fit right in here, no doubt about it. But people talk about our federal budget deficit. We have an empathy deficit. We aren't able to see the world through other people's eyes. Yeah. And that's what I think I can provide. Now, very concretely, what we need to do when it comes to issues of race, I think a lot of the tensions are tied to economics. African Americans and Latinos are much more likely to be unemployed, employed in lower wage jobs, not have health care, be in substandard schools, drop out of school. So on every indicator, they're doing worse. And that contributes to that gap in perceptions that you're talking about, because the glass often looks half empty to a lot of African American and Latino children. And so part of our job in investing in early childhood education, or making sure that they're going to outstanding schools, or ensuring equality of opportunity when it comes to employment, enforcing our civil rights laws, investigating crimes like nooses being hung in classrooms. All that contributes to a sense that these kids matter to us, that they're not those kids, they're our kids. And when we can have a culture and a government that perceives every child as mattering, then they will respond differently, and I think we will start stitching together the kind of America that all of us hope and dream for.
Amazing. Right. Good. Absolutely. Perfect. Let's get a couple questions from the audience. I've also got why don't you go ahead, and I've also got some that were submitted that we also ranked, so go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. Your words are really inspiring. I really appreciate it. I've been voting for quite a few years. little older than the average Googler, and
Yeah, you know, you're like, look like you might almost be my age.
maybe a little older.
Yeah.
And, you know, Bill Clinton is the only Democrat elected in the last 30 years. And he's the only Democrat elected twice since World War II.
Right,
I'm tired of losing.
right.
So what have you learned from Clinton that is going to make you win? What are you going to do differently? And what have you learned from Gore and from Kerry and all those guys that you're going to avoid so that history doesn't reoccur?
Well, first of all, I think there is a lot to learn from Bill Clinton. I mean, one of the things that Clinton did, I think, was recognize the moment. We were in a particular moment in 1991-92 when the Democrats had not wrung out the excesses of the 60s and early 70s. We were still deeply invested in identity politics, in interest group politics, and the Democratic Congress wasn't showing itself adaptable and shaking off some of the orthodoxies of the past. And he came in and he said, you know what, I'm a different kind of Democrat, and I'm willing to do things in some new ways. And that was a powerful message for that moment. The reason I'm running and the reason I believe I'm going to win is because we are in a different moment. So you can't just copy what Bill Clinton did, but you have to take the same approach. What is it that's needed right now? And I believe that what's needed right now is the capacity to bring people together to think in practical, reasoned ways about big problems that we face, to be straight with the American people about and honest with them about the challenges that we face. So part of what our message is built around is that we are in this defining moment, and we can't keep doing the same things that we've been doing that haven't been working. So that's point number one. What I've learned in terms of how Democrats lose, Democrats lose when they are not clear about what they stand for. Democrats lose when they are attacked, and because they don't know where they stand, they end up getting defensive instead of going on the offensive. So let me give you a very specific example. I am looking forward to having a debate with whether it's Rudy Giuliani or Mitt Romney about the fear-mongering that has dominated the Republican debate of late, where they say, I'm going to double Guantanamo, or I think torture is okay, or, you know, or at least we'll redefine torture. So torture is not okay, but these things that look a lot like it are okay. Or we need to do whatever it takes to, you know, read people's emails. And I am looking forward to having that debate. The problem we have is when we get defensive, and we're not sure about our beliefs and our convictions. And so we start trying to sound a little bit like them. And that is a profound mistake. One of the things that my wife and we said to ourselves when we got into this race is, if we start sounding like everybody else, then what's the point? You know, I should go work for Google. You know, it'll be
But you answered the question
more
correctly.
fun. And I did answer the question correctly. So making sure that we're clear about where we stand, honest with the American people, seizing the moment and recognizing that we have to deal with climate change now. We have to deal with health care now. We have to revamp our education system now. We have to double our investment in research and science now. Understanding that we don't have a lot of time to waste, that I think is going to be a compelling message for the American people. Okay.
Thank you very much, Senator. We have an electronically submitted question dealing with federal deficit.
Yeah.
What concrete steps will the Obama administration take to address the federal government's deficit and debt? What specific tax measures and/or program changes will you recommend to Congress?
This has been the fiscally most irresponsible administration that we have seen. I mean, we have increased the national debt, almost doubled it since George Bush took office. It is now over $9 trillion. And that is money that we're all going to have to pay back. So the first thing that we have to do is to bring an end to this war in Iraq. We're spending $10 to $12 billion per month. The latest request for both Iraq and Afghanistan are $196 billion for next year. 1 year, $196 billion. That is money that could be providing health insurance to all Americans. It could be rebuilding our schools. It could be providing higher teacher salaries. It could be providing scholarships for every American young person who's going to college. So we are using our resources in a way that's not sound. We can recapture some of that money. Some of it will go to taking care of our veterans. Some of it should go to social programs. Some of it should go towards deficit reduction. Second principle is a very simple principle called PAYGO. If you want to cut taxes, you've got to cut spending. If you want to raise spending, you've got to raise revenue so that you have honest accounting. Right now, the federal budget is not honest. And unless we have good numbers, we can't end up dealing with this budget issue. Now, the biggest problem we have in terms of our budget, though, long term, and look, I want to eliminate no-bid contracts. I want to scrub the federal budget free of earmarks and pet projects that are not based on our national priorities. And that requires transparency in government. I talked earlier about the power of technology. One of the things that we've done, you'll be pleased to know that we call this the Google for Government bill.
And Google is in favor of it.
Yes. And what it does is we're going to set up a searchable database for every dollar of federal spending so that we can track it, which means that we'll be able to, journalists and ordinary citizens and think tanks and advocacy groups will be able to see if money is going to a bridge to nowhere instead of going to a bridge to somewhere. We'll be able to challenge it in real time, and that's going to be important. But the last thing I was going to mention, and this is probably the biggest problem we have with the federal budget, is healthcare spending, Medicare and Medicaid. That's the big budget buster. That's the scary thing out there that will be like the blob. It will just consume everything unless we do something about it now. And again, technology is part of the answer, and innovation is going to be part of the answer in reducing these costs. The reason that healthcare costs are skyrocketing, it's not so much that the population's getting older. That contributes a little bit to it. But the main problem is healthcare inflation goes up 6, 8, 10% per year. It's unsustainable. And so, for example, if we use health IT, simple stuff, making sure that everybody's medical records are on in a digital form, so that when a nurse pulls up somebody's chart, they can actually read the writing, and they're not administering the wrong drug. Making sure that billing is all electronic. That can make a huge difference. Investing in prevention so that children are getting regular checkups instead of having to go to the emergency room for treatable illnesses like asthma. That makes an enormous difference. That will probably be the biggest savings item for our federal budget if we do it right, and people like yourselves can be a part of that process. So.
Thank you. Ethan.
Thank you, Senator Obama, for coming to visit us. We're really pulling for you out here in the Bay Area.
Thank you.
I'm a big supporter and a vocal supporter, and the biggest issue that I constantly hear brought up about you is the lack of experience, the inexperience issue, and I hear it amongst my friends, you read about it in the press, I'm sure you've had to answer lots of questions about it. Without getting into, or frankly, I guess you can, but without getting into whether experience makes a difference or not, but what are you actually going to do to address this perceived weakness and allow a lot of voters that want to get behind you and want to support you to get past this issue of inexperience?
Right. Well, look, first of all, Sergey and Larry didn't have a lot of experience starting a Fortune 100 company. And I suppose when they came in and were talking to Dave Drummond about incorporating Google, he could have said, these guys don't know what they're doing. But what we're looking for, I believe, when it comes to leadership, is judgment, vision, character. And that's what I bring to bear in this race. I have the experience of bringing people together to get things done that I would put up against any candidate in this race. When I was in Illinois, I expanded health care to Illinoisans by getting Democrats and Republicans to agree and work together. We were able to reform a death penalty system that was broken by getting law enforcement and civil rights advocates to agree on things that people said were impossible, but I was able to get it done. Partly because I'm pretty good at listening to people and finding common ground. I've also got the ability to stand up for what I believe in, even when it's unpopular, which I think is the quality that the next president has to provide. I mean, part of the reason I was opposed to the war in Iraq back in 2002 when George Bush was at 65%. I didn't just stumble into that. It was based on having thought through what the consequences would be, understanding that I was running in a U.S. Senate race and I might lose my race. But I thought that it was important to speak out forcefully on what I believed in. I think that's what the next president has to offer. And I know how to choose talent and get smart people around me who are capable and independent and bring together a variety of different points of views and then set a vision and move in the same direction. That, more than anything, is what we need. We're not looking for a chief operating officer when we select a president. What we're looking for is somebody who will chart a course and say, here's where America needs to go. Here's how we need to solve our energy crisis. Here's how we need to revamp our education system, and then gather the talent together and mobilize that talent to achieve that goal and to inspire a sense of hope and possibility. So one way to answer this question is to say, look, the guy's been in public service for 20 years. He's a constitutional law professor. He was a civil rights lawyer. He did X, Y, and Z in the state legislature. He's done all these wonderful things in the United States Senate. But I think the main way to respond is to say, this is all about judgment and character. And also, I think, a little sense of impatience. Because part of the reason I'm running is I'm impatient with the status quo. And what we've seen out of Democrats and Republicans, what we've seen from Democrats and Republicans is a certain willingness to tolerate what I consider to be an intolerable status quo. And I think the American people feel that same frustration. So, thank you.
Why don't we have we're going to have our, unfortunately, our last question, so why don't you go ahead?
Senator, you said you had a bias to act against special interests.
Yeah.
But if special interests are having a perverting influence on the entire legislative process, what can you propose as president that can make it through that process intact?
Yeah, it's the classic question of how do you get insiders to fix a system that they're benefiting from. And it's hard. You have to use shame. No, and I mean that. I'll give you an example. Last year, I passed the toughest ethics reform legislation since Watergate. And I worked with Russ Feingold. We eliminated corporate gifts, or gifts from lobbyists, meals from lobbyists, corporate jets from lobbyists. We required the disclosure of campaign contributions that were bundled from lobbyists. And I'll be honest with you, when we first started, it wasn't just resistance from Republicans. There were Democrats who didn't want to see this happen either. But what I knew was that if you stuck with it and you got it to the floor where people had to vote, then it was going to be hard for them to vote against it. So part of the the key for any reform is going to be getting the American people to pay enough attention that members of Congress start worrying, you know what, the American people are looking at us. And so we better change how we behave. That's why this Google for Government is so important, because that's why transparency generally is so important in this entire process. Because the more American people know, the more government is going to be held accountable. And I'll give you just one very specific example around healthcare. I mentioned that I want to set up a system where every American has healthcare that's at least as good as the healthcare I've got as a member of Congress. And if people want to, and if you're interested in the details of the healthcare plan, you can go to my website, barackobama.com. But people ask me, well, why do you think you can get it done? And overcome the insurance and the drug companies that spent $1 billion over the last decade preventing reform from happening in lobbying and campaign contributions. And what I tell them is, you know, I respect what the Clintons tried to do in 1993 in moving health reform forward. But they made one really big mistake, and that is they took all their people and all their experts into a room and then they closed the door. And they tried to design the plan in isolation from the American people. And during that period of time, the insurance companies and the drug companies and the HMOs, they mobilized. And by the time the Clintons announced their plan, you already had these Harry and Louise ads out. You guys don't remember this, you weren't born, maybe. I'm teasing. You were 6. But these ads were out there that convinced the American people they should be afraid of healthcare reform. Now, I will do it entirely differently. Within the first 100 days of my administration, we are going to have a big table, and everybody's going to be invited. Labor, employers, doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, patient advocate groups, the drug and insurance companies, they'll all get a seat at the table. They just won't get to buy every chair. And we will work on this process publicly. It'll be on C-SPAN. It will be streaming over the net. And every time we hit a glitch where somebody says, well, no, we can't lower drug prices because of, you know, the R&D costs that drug companies need, well, we'll present data and facts that make it more difficult for people to carry the water of the special interests because it's public. And if they start running Harry and Louise ads, I'll run my own ads, or I'll send out something on YouTube. I'm president. I'll be able to. I'll let them know what the facts are. You know, one of the things that you learn when you're traveling and running for president is the American people at their core are a decent people. There's a generosity of spirit there, and there's common sense there, but it's not tact. And mainly people they're just misinformed, or they are too busy. They're trying to get their kids to school. They're working. They just don't have enough information, or they're not professionals at sorting out all the information that's out there. And so our political process gets skewed. But if you give them good information, their instincts are good and they will make good decisions. And the president has the bully pulpit to give them good information. And that's what we have to return to, is a government where the American people trust the information they're getting. And I'm really looking forward to doing that, because I am a big believer in reason and facts and evidence and science and feedback. Everything that allows you to do what you do, that's what we should be doing in our government. I mean, I want people in technology. I want innovators and engineers and scientists like yourselves. I want you helping us make policy based on facts, based on reason.